Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. I'm really excited about today's guest, Juan Taveras. He's with DEI Pro Finder. We're going to talk all about that. He's a CEO. He's also a strategic human resources leader driving DEI solutions. We're going to talk all about DEI. And he coaches leaders on how to create, maintain, and lead psychologically safe teams, something so important. It's a really fascinating discussion about DEI, leadership, management, team, and I'm happy to welcome him to the show. Juan, welcome.
Thank you so much, Christopher. Happy to be here.
Yeah, kind of talk about your background, your story, your experience, and what you're doing with DEI Pro Finder.
Absolutely, yes. So let's see where to begin. Always hard to decide where to start. I'll start by sharing that I've been in the HR, the human resources field for 13 years. We're going on 14, which is kind of crazy to believe. I started my career in the hospitality industry. So I went to school for hospitality and worked in the hotel and restaurant space for about 5 or 6 years, and then transitioned into the HR world. And I'd like to say that I was attracted to the HR space because it's just a different way of taking care of people, right? So what I learned in hospitality to be, customer centric and really focusing on the experience of each individual customer when they walk into your restaurant or your hotel, because you want that person to come back, you want them to spread the word, and so I bring all of that training and mentality into my HR space, into my HR work, because I think employees and team members, staff members are the company's clients, or one of them. And as an HR leader, that's I was excited to be focused on that, supporting people, whether it's a new hire, getting them onboarded, or someone who's looking for career growth and development, like all the entire employee lifespan. There are many opportunities for you as an HR leader to engage and support a positive and engaging experience there. So that's what drew me to the work. But after 13 years of doing this work, mostly in the nonprofit sector, and I've done pretty much everything. I consider myself a generalist. I've done anything from recruiting to benefits administration to senior leadership work and strategic development. Did that for a while. And then over the last few years have had a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So supporting the organizations that I was working with developing DEI strategies and then embedding DEI intentionally into everything that we did, right, as an organization or a business. And HR policies and procedures were a big part of that. So did that work, was really enjoying it. But had this itch, right, about a year and a half ago, that I wanted to do more. I wanted to impact more people and reach more people. So decided to go off on my own, started my own business. And one of the things that and my wife is my co-founder and partner in a lot of the work that I do. But one of the things we started with was DEI Pro Finder, which is an online directory for DEI consultants, because one of the challenges that I had as an HR leader doing DEI work is, I don't consider myself a DEI expert. And when you're starting to develop strategy, you quickly realize, oh gosh, there's a lot of different ways to address DEI work. There's a lot of different needs depending on the population that you're working with. So you need help. You need consultants who specialize in specific areas to help you do some of that programming and implement training, etc. So it was hard. I was surprised with how hard it was to find the right consultant for the work that I was trying to do. And a directory like DEI Pro Finder did not exist. There were, I shouldn't say that. There were a handful that were out there on the internet, but some of them had a paywall. So you have to pay just to get access, which never felt right to me. And then others were very limited. It was like very specific, either industry specific or very niched. So we created DEI Pro Finder because we from personal experience, I knew this was a need. So now we get a year later. So the directory now has over 120 consultants as members on our directory, and I now get to build bridges, is what I call them, like chief bridge builder, between HR and business leaders and DI consultants. And it's one of some of my favorite work that I get to do is to help people essentially that are currently in the role that I was in 1 to 2 years ago, scratching my head about like, where do I go for DI support? Now I get to help them and make connections to specific DI consultants that can get their work, that can help them do their work a little better. And then in addition to that, some like the business has evolved now a little bit. And you mentioned psychological safety, which is something that we're incredibly passionate about, because one thing we realized is in order to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work well, you really have to first ensure that you have safety on your team, psychological safety specifically, because DI work is very personal. We're talking about our identities. These conversations can be triggering or challenging. So it requires a special kind of facilitation and the establishment, first off, of psychological safety in the space. So my wife and I have been doing a lot of work around that, as a precursor to the deeper DEI work. So I feel like I said a lot there to that opening question, but hopefully that gives you a sense of what I do.
Yeah, which kind of sets the stage, and we're going to talk about DEI. But one thing is talking about this new concept of psychological safety. And I actually read a recent article, I think it was on LinkedIn. It was talking about how a lot of software engineers, they see a lot of things wrong. And also in healthcare too, a lot of people see things wrong, but they're afraid to speak up because it's not psychologically safe. So first, define what it is and what inspired your focus on psychological safety and why it's essential for team success.
Love that question. Absolutely. So let's talk about what psychological safety is, because you're right. It has become a bit of a buzzword over the last year. And I'll start by highlighting a few leaders in the space, right? So folks, names that you might recognize, like Amy Edmondson, a professor at Harvard Business School. She wrote a book called The Fearless Organization, where she talks about how leaders, the importance of psychological safety on teams specifically, and how teams that have psychological safety outperform teams that don't, for reasons that we'll talk about in a second. Then I also want to call out Dr. Tim Clark, who wrote The 4 Stages of Inclusion. Excuse me, I might have gotten that wrong. The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety is inclusion is a big part of it. But I highly recommend his book. He's done a lot of research on that, and he currently runs a leadership coaching and training firm that does a lot of work in the space. So just want to call out those folks, because this is what my wife and I are doing in our work, is leveraging a lot of their learnings, right? A lot of their research, and embedding it into daily leadership practices, right? And essentially operationalizing what psychological safety can look like and feel like in the workplace. So what it is, psychological safety is creating an environment where people feel comfortable expressing their opinion, even when it's different than someone else's, especially a leader's opinion, right? So pushing against the status quo, when they feel comfortable being themselves, right? If someone should feel comfortable in the workplace, asking any kind of question, whether it's quote unquote silly or not, it doesn't matter. Like any question that's on their mind, they feel comfortable asking it. They feel comfortable saying that they don't agree with something. They feel comfortable sharing ideas that are out of the box and different. What we want to avoid with creating those spaces is things like groupthink, or more dangerously, like you were saying earlier, silence, right? So when people see that something is going on that shouldn't be, or they are sort of reading between the lines and saying this is going to end badly, but I'm afraid to say something because I might get in trouble, there's a lack of safety in that space, right? So no one should feel like they cannot say what's on their mind, because ultimately that's how we create engagement, and that's what breeds innovation and creativity, when people are free to express what's on their mind and what's on their hearts. And then leaders play a big role, both team leaders but also HR leaders play a big role in the way that they foster those spaces, right? So when you think about specific policies, whether it's an official HR policy, but even like a leader, the way that they manage their team, how are they behaving? How are they showing up? Are they encouraging their team members to deliberate, to have open dialogue, to disagree intentionally, right? To like acknowledge that we don't know everything, right? We're all in this together. We're sort of learning and growing together, and it requires a acknowledgement of our own deficits and gaps and failures. So being that requires also vulnerability, right? We need to be very vulnerable with ourselves and each other in order to have those kinds or conversations at those levels, right? So that's where what psychological safety is. It is not always being nice or avoiding conflict, which is something that we hear about a lot. There's especially, gosh, in the post-pandemic world that we live in now, there's a lot of sensitivity, right, around what people say and how people communicate, because they're afraid, to your point from earlier, of saying the wrong thing or of getting in trouble. And that is different, right? Then being uncomfortable does not mean necessarily that you lack psychological safety, right? Because part of psychological safety is also stepping outside of your comfort zone. It requires embracing fear a little bit, right? But doing that in a way that feels what do you call it? Like you're not going to get in trouble for doing that also. So there's like that balance. But one thing I hear often from leaders is like, oh, I don't want to offend anyone, or I don't want anyone to feel like I'm judging them. And it's like, yeah, it requires a little bit of discomfort. We have to lean into it in order to fully understand it and embrace it.
Yeah, I really love that. And so kind of this idea of psychological safety, and just kind of this this idea of workplace, and it's basically kind of this place where you view the workplace as adversarial, and just a lot of people are doing their own things now. But one thing is this quite talk about is this idea of this new term DEI, and it's had a lot of pushback, and there's also like Supreme Court ruling banning affirmative action now in higher education. So kind of we talk about defining inclusion, and how do you define inclusion in the workplace, and can you give us some practical examples of how to foster it?
Great question. Yes, and I'm glad you're focusing on inclusion, because that's a big part of our focus in our work. Is you can't create psychological safety without embedding inclusive practices in everything that you do. And then what we mean by inclusion is creating and allowing space for all ideas, for all perspectives, right? It's not about what's trending or what some folks call woke culture, right? Like it's about everyone having an opportunity to say what's on their mind and speak from their own personal lived experience, and us as leaders being able to manage that space and maintain safety, right? So we don't want anyone to feel otherized or ostracized or excluded, right? That's actually the opposite of inclusion, right? When you're excluding. So to be an inclusive leader, you really have to hone your skills around facilitating spaces where difference can exist, and it's a healthy difference, right? It's a there's a term we use, constructive conflict, where you're focused more on the exchange of ideas as opposed to personal attacks or who's right and who's wrong. It's not about right and wrong. It's about the expression of our thoughts and perspectives.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I love that. And so the other, the other question is this, there's this battle between the old and the new, and then the old was kind of like very hierarchical, very rigid and structured, very homogeneous, and now there's push for change from you and from others, and social media has really enabled this, and we're talking about DEI, and then the one question is, what's to keep somebody from just basically, like, they say, okay, I can't work here because it's just basically what you were saying is you're looking for more, right? So they're like, okay, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to become a social media influencer. I'm going to talk about DEI. I can get more done. I can get 1 million followers and preach in, and, you know, people will listen. Whereas if I just stay in this organization that just kind of gives a lot of platitudes, talk about, you know, this dichotomy.
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think there's a natural friction, right, that comes along with this work, because there are, again, just so many different perspectives on how to do this. And when I work with clients, whether it's an entire leadership team or one-on-one coaching, one of the things we focus on is values, right? So every organization has core values, and the things that they consider, whether those are ideas or behaviors or expectations that they consider important in how they do their work. And it's that's relevant, right? And how, because it leads to the culture, right? In that organization, it is a very big tenet of what that culture will look like, and that culture then will, depending on what it is, determines on what the DEI work looks like, right? So I, as an HR leader, had to be very aware of the organizational culture, right, where I was working in, and the core values, and my personal values and beliefs, and then trying to align that as much as possible. It was not 100%, and the chances are that it's very unlikely, unless you're the CEO, right, and you're making these sort of building this culture around yourself. But yeah, there's this friction there, and you have to be aware of it. I don't think that again, like I said, it's not right or wrong. There's nothing bad about that. But awareness is key. And when you sense, well, first of all, when you're aware of it, then you are better equipped to navigate those challenges when they show up, right? Because there were times, even in my work, where there would be a situation that I had a personal reaction to, but then I have to remember, well, in this moment, I am the HR leader for this organization, so I have to wear my HR leader hat and set aside my personal beliefs. But if I hadn't had that awareness, right, of that conscious awareness of that difference, it would have been really hard to separate those two things and navigate that situation. So when I work with leaders, it really boils down to knowing yourself, knowing the organizational values, and then how are those two things engaging and interacting. And then, to your point, if that friction is sort of dominating your brain space and your time, and you can't get past it, and you've tried some things, it's not I'm not suggesting anyone quit their job because there's a little friction, but if you've tried some things, you've given it time, you've explored it, and there's just that friction is still there, and it becomes hard to be able to focus and engage on your work, and it starts to impact every other aspects of your life, right? Yeah. Then, to your point, it might be time for a change, and that's where I was a year and a half ago now. I was like, you know what, this is, I see a better path for the work that I want to be doing. So I'm going to go down that path, as opposed to continuing to fight this fight. Yeah.
Interesting question. Yeah, like I said, it's like the beauty of here in the West, especially in the United States, we have a lot of economic freedom. It's like, if we don't like our job or boss, we can, always quit and just do our own thing. Other places, if you do that, you're SOL. But here we have a lot of options, and like I said, economic freedom. So it's really interesting. Kind of closing, talk about your current goals, and then what are your business goals right now, what steps are you taking to achieve it, and your advice for future leaders, for those aspiring to lead with a focus on DEI. What key piece of advice would you offer them?
In inclusion. Yeah, thank you for that. So my business, as I said, I'm sort of following there's been a natural progression in how the work is unfolding. So I'm kind of just going with the flow right now and following opportunities. So, what started as a directory for consultants has now led to a lot of organizational consulting work and some one-on-one coaching. And now I still have the desire of reaching as many people as possible. So we've developed our first course, my wife and I, around psychological safety, which is now available online. It's a self-paced, on-demand online course to help leaders show them how to develop psychological safety on their teams, to ensure that they're practicing in inclusivity, and that whatever DEI strategies they implement will actually be successful or more successful because of it. So that's one piece. And then as far as my advice to leaders, and this is what I start all of my coaching conversations with, is, how much time have you spent on yourself? How much time have you spent learning about your values, your strengths, your what drains you and what fills you up? And just the more you know about yourself, the better able you will be to show up as a leader for your team and your organization. And then it's sort of it's a ripple effect, right? But so often, and again, this is my own experience, leaders focus on things that are outside of them, like, oh, I need this certification, or I need this to develop this skill, or I need, which is also, it matters, it's important, but it's not as impactful as focusing inward first and really getting to know yourself and who you are, and who you want to be. Also, there's like that who you are today versus who you're going to be in 5 years, and etc. So that's my advice. And if they need help with that, I'm happy to chat.
Excellent. Yeah. And for all the audience out there, let's thank Juan for a really interesting conversation, very well spoken. All of his resources will be in the links and show notes. And be sure to give him a follow, like, share, comment, subscribe. And with that, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Christopher. It was a pleasure.